Habit Finder Power Session, please hold. 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 Habit Finder Power Session. I think it's about time we should start. Okay, those of you who've never seen a power session before, just learned really quickly that I don't take myself too seriously most of the time. I try really hard not to. I try really hard. No. Anyway, so we're off to a phenomenal start this morning, okay? Super excited to be here with you today for our weekly power session. This is an opportunity for me to just go with what's in here and allow you to sort through it and find stuff that's going to help you in your life, in your relationships, in your business, in your health, and anything else. So looking forward to spending some time today talking about some stuff. I've got a rant I'll get into in just a minute, but what good is a rant without an audience? So we'll lay a couple foundational pieces out first as we give everybody a chance to log on and jump in for a power session on a beautiful day. The weather is amazing outside. I actually found out, just preview of things to come, that there is a fireplace in the back of our office building with quite a fair amount of patio area. And so I'm thinking it's going to be time for some Blanchard firesides here now that the weather's nicer, and finding a couple evening times that me and my dad can jump on Facebook Live right out there in the back of our office building, light a fire right there in the outdoor fireplace that we've got, and just invite all of you in. In fact, we might even get to the point where if you want to attend one live, I think we could fit a good 20, 30 chairs in that patio area in the back of our office building. We can all enjoy the fire and some discussion and bring everybody else in live that would love to join in that. So anyway, keep an eye out for that as the weather improves, as we're in this wonderful season where being outside rocks. I got my wife a fire table for Mother's Day, which is this beautiful granite table that goes out for our outdoor sofa on our porch that you just got to turn a knob and put a lighter in it, and you got flames with this broken glass and lava stone and stuff, and the girls get to roast marshmallows on it. Anyway, super awesome, and just a really great addition to being outside, being in warm conditions. I love this time of year. I love the summer, and love all the adventures that it opens up. And we're super busy here, which is always super fun. So anyway, enough blah, blah, blah. Okay. Not that that's blah, blah, blah. That's exciting stuff. That's lots of fun. So anyway, moms love fire tables. That's great. So I wanted to share something that happened this morning. And then I'm going to talk about a topic that's been inspired by a couple of conversations I've had with a few clients over the last couple of weeks, along with it'll probably get some stuff pulled in from just conversations I've had over several years, as it usually does as my brain gets going. So with that said, this morning, as I was getting ready in the gym, I overheard a gentleman talking to another person, and both of them are people I know and I would consider them friends. We don't know each other and hang out outside the gym, but we're friendly. And one of them said, "You definitely don't want another girl. Girls are harder." And they were talking about having kids. And it just, okay. So I'm going to address this. I'm going to take a risk, which I'm a big fan of taking risks. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I'm going to go off script a little bit of what I usually focus on. I have some hard and fast rules of things I don't talk about on Facebook, because whether it's my personal page or this Habit Finder page, I'm a representative and an officer in this company. I want to really honor that. But I've got to be a little raw this morning. And that is, please, can we stop making the argument that it is harder to raise girls than it is to raise boys? It is not harder. And I get it. I've got 3 girls. I grew up with, there were 7 of us in my family. There were 4 girls and 3 boys. And I was the second youngest, right in the middle of the 4 girls. So my 2 brothers were the oldest. But on top of that, I've got limited experience. I've got a young family. I get all that. You can make plenty of arguments against whatever I want to say today. But you're here watching me, so I would imagine you want to hear what I have to say to some extent. But I'm talking about hundreds, if not thousands of clients that I've worked with, couples and parents that have had boys and girls and boys and girls. And there's a couple challenges with this philosophy. There's a couple challenges with this idea. And first and foremost is they're different. I'm not here to argue that. They are different. There are inherent differences. And if we were to really break those down, we'd probably say, here are the dominant characteristics of raising girls, and here are the dominant characteristics of raising boys. And, people are going to land, your kids are going to land in different parts of this scale and kind of have both worlds, okay? There are a lot of really girly things about my girls that I love and super appreciate. And there's some boy things about my girls that I think is really fun and super cool and whatever. Anyway, so raising boys and girls are different, not harder. Because here's a problem that we've created in our society, and this just hit me like a ton of bricks this morning. Too many people have believed that it's harder to raise girls than it is to raise boys, meaning it requires more of our attention to raise girls, meaning it's raising a boy, you just have to use a hammer. Raising a girl, you've got to use a scalpel in terms of your methods and different things like that. I get the justifications, I get the rationalizations, but it is not serving our community. It's not serving our society. Because the hard fact, and this is from our experience with over 150,000 people that we've been able to dive into their brains and how they think, that especially in relationships, especially in society today, as we're finding people being more and more courageous to share about what their life has really been like, especially when it comes to gender, when it comes to the challenges that have been presented there. It's really interesting to me that in my experience, statistically in our experience, I should say, as a company, that there are a lot more boys, we'll say, because we're talking about raising boys and girls, creating major challenges out there for girls than there are girls creating major challenges for boys. It's the reality of our experience. There's a lot of boys out there that are not honoring their relationships. There are a lot of boys out there, and I get it. It goes both ways. I'm not here to say it's overwhelmingly one side than the other, but it is a majority. And it got me thinking this morning, if we keep telling ourselves it's harder to raise girls than it is to raise boys, is that because we're not doing a very good job of raising some of our boys? And I'm speaking in general. So I know there's some moms on here that I know of, and I've already seen pop on here that I consider very dear. And I know that the boys that they're raising are being treated the right way. That it's not just some overgeneralization of it's harder to raise girls. Yeah, so a girl won't, raising a girl, they won't let you half-ass stuff. They won't let you not be emotionally available. I get it, and that kind of thing can make it harder, but the same rules should be applying to teaching your boys about connection and life and emotional availability and all these wonderful things that, yeah, sure, you could write off as being easier or harder, but at what cost? When I was a competitive power lifter, and I've shared this with many clients, in a competition, in a competitive meet, okay, you've got an opportunity, you start with squat, then you do bench, then you do deadlift. And I always love to ask people, which one do you think is the most dangerous? Which one do you think is the most dangerous? And most people get drawn to deadlift because it's got the word dead in it, okay? And it has been an infamous lift for creating injury. But all three of them have, if you really break it down statistically. But what I found out is that the most dangerous lift is the one you're the best at. In other words, the one that comes easiest to you. Now, it may come easy to you because you put in a lot of practice and a lot of hard work. It may come easy to you because you have a lot of natural strength in that particular area of the body that's required to excel in that particular lift. But all of it comes down to some part of you feels like it's easier. And that makes it the most dangerous lift. And because it's easier, it is your best lift. That's a great advantage. You're using your strengths, you're using your gifts, but that is also what immediately puts you at a disadvantage for injury, at a disadvantage for not being as conscious, not being as detailed, not being as intentional as you might want to be. Because if there's something I found, and I grew up a boy, and I've got a lot of guy friends, and I've seen my parents raise boys, I've seen other people raise boys, and I get that there are differences. But to assume that one is harder than the other is a cop-out. because both should require just as much attention. Both should require just as much love and understanding. Both should require just as much hard lessons and hard love and emotional availability and connection. Even though they're different, they should both feel just as difficult, because that's the truth of it. Parenting is hard. It's really difficult to do. I mean, you've got all of your insecurities, all of your challenges, and the way your brain is compensated for what you've gone through in your life. And now you've got to be responsible for another human beings that we have a society set up to have us feel like we're going to make or break them, whether we intellectually rationalize it differently or not. Parenting is really hard. So let's be careful to not get into this gentrification of which one's harder than the other. They're different, but the principles that should be applied to both should be the same, so that we don't end up perpetuating this challenge we've got in this society that is not just guys doing things to girls, but it is the majority of a lot of challenges being created on that side of the fence. And I couldn't help but wonder this morning if that had any correlation to believing that it's easier to raise them, because that becomes our best lift, our easiest lift, and immediately becomes the most dangerous one. Just an interesting correlation to consider. So let's stop, because when I tell people I've got 3 girls, I get it all the time. Oh, you're in trouble. I became a parent. I got married. That was trouble. Like, it's all trouble. Let's be careful to not convince ourselves of nuance, like something like gender, making it totally different in terms of the principles. Because we've found, boy or girl, the principles we teach apply the same. Caring about a human being, stepping into their world, validating them, creating a safe place, using your mind constructively rather than allowing it to go into destructive uses of fantasy and catastrophe, or even worse, counterfeit mental pleasure. And these things where we're drowning ourselves in games and pornography and drugs and all these different things. Yes, they're different, but what if convinced that this one was easier created some blind spots? Because that's what that does. When we start getting into this is harder, this is easier, is we're immediately putting ourselves at risk of the easier taking advantage of us and not getting our best. Because that's when you get injured, is the lift you thought you were the best at doesn't get your best, because you naturally let your guard down, because consciously or unconsciously you were convinced it was the best. So anyway, thanks for letting me take a minute to rant a little bit on this. I'm not angry at people that believe raising girls is harder. It just, there's a lot going on right now in our society. And the more we can start seeing each other as human beings rather than classifications and categorizations, the better. And so, yeah, there are differences, there are nuances. I am not ignorant of that whatsoever, okay? And if you were to plot me on this scale, I'd probably be a little bit further on the girl side, growing up with 4 sisters, 3 daughters. I love chick flicks, very in touch with my feminine side. Thank goodness I've got this 6'5", 300-pound frame to balance out the masculinity involved. But it's just different. It's not harder or easier. To give us an opportunity to make sure that both get the best of us, both get taught principles, that both, whether one responds up front differently to emotion or responds up front differently to connection and to love and to touch and to all these things that should be involved on both sides, respect and discipline and hard work and kindness and patience. That's neither harder nor easier. It's the principles that we apply with just as much intentionality and understand those differences so that we can connect with them and give them a safe place to be them, but teach them about this beautiful space here in the middle that is humanity, that has nothing to do with the gender, the humanity, because that's where we connect. That's where we get an opportunity to feel like we belong to this world, without creating overcompensations of needing to belong to particular groups and sacrificing who we really are in the process. Okay. A little deep, okay? A little off script of where I usually go, those of you jumping into a power session for the first time, because your friends or coworkers or partners or friends told you about this. Probably a little different than you were expecting, but it was really hitting me this morning from a good place. It didn't make me angry, but it just got the wheels turning. I was like, oh, I want a platform to share this. And I was like, oh yes, it's Tuesday, it's power session time. And I just appreciate the trust and getting to spend some of your really valuable time to just share something that really hit me hard personally this morning. And that I hope gives you an opportunity to consider some of those things that we use as presumptions, as excuses, as rationalizations, not just in the topic I was talking about this morning, or today, but in all things, just getting an opportunity to question our own questions. It's a really fun place to be, because we can get it caught up in the wrong focus, in procedures and preferences versus principles. And Og talked about procedures and preferences. They're like fashion. What works today doesn't work tomorrow, but principles endure. Only principles endure. And those should be applied across the board, regardless of who you're connecting with, who you're talking to. And be really careful to not let the outlying differences disconnect us from this connection that makes all of us human, because it's a beautiful thing. Okay? All right. Woo! Okay. All right. Can't say that it's going to get any lighter. So, all right. Okay. Cool. Just checking a couple comments. And I appreciate your comments. Getting an opportunity to go back afterwards and look at those at a lot of times, or keep an eye on things along the way. So the next piece that I mentioned in the topic for today that I want to talk about was metaphysical addiction. I wrote a memoir. How long that would have been? almost 14 years ago, 13 years ago. 13 years ago, I wrote a memoir on a computer that the hard drive ended up dying, so I lost it. But it was called Metaphysical Detox. Metaphysical Detox, meaning I was really getting heavily into personal development, had been for a couple of years at that point. But just noticing some patterns, and these are the patterns that I wanted to discuss today, to share with you, so that you can take these patterns and take a look at them and challenge them in your own life to see if how these patterns may be showing up for you. Some of them biological, some of them philosophical. But I saw so many people. Metaphysical is a really fancy term for personal development and introspection and things that are outside just the physical functions of your body, and has a lot more to do with the mind and mindset, and all that's going to fall into the metaphysical category. And I realize it's bigger than that, but most commonly when you're talking about the metaphysical, you're talking about meditation and introspection and personal development and mindset and all those different kinds of things. But I saw people that were becoming addicted to the metaphysical, becoming addicted to ahas and breakthroughs. Those of you who've heard me speak before know that I'm not a big fan of inherent ahas and breakthroughs. Mostly just not because of the aha or breakthrough itself, but because of what it does to the human brain and what it limits us from being able to create. See, there's a major challenge in terms of what we're doing, okay? So in terms of what we're trying to create and what we want to be able to experience. And there's a really basic principle, a couple basic principles. One is that your brain has one objective, okay? To keep you safe. And I've talked about this a lot. And the challenge, and what really made a huge breakthrough for myself, for our clients, was realizing that your brain trying to keep you safe actually means it just wants to keep you predictable. That's number one. That's the most powerful influence in your makeup, in your activity, in your thoughts. And what you do is your brain trying to keep you safe. In evolutionary psychology, okay, survival is number one that makes us act irrationally. And we find out through those studies that the majority of what we do is irrational, okay? And then we end up rationalizing it after the fact. And some of us get so good at rationalizing it that we even become convinced that we had that rationalization before we took the irrational behavior, which is kind of interesting. But we don't have time to get into evolutionary psychology today. But number one, your brain wants to keep you safe, which means it wants to keep you predictable. But number two is interesting, and it's way down number two. This is easily the most powerful force you're dealing with. But number two is that your brain loves emotional payoffs. Loves them just as much as you love emotional payoffs. But the challenge is that the same hard-coded unconscious mind, the one that Og talked about that makes us act in ways we do not comprehend, okay, that never sleeps, it creates our dreams. It's a really powerful, beautiful thing, but it's got an advantage on you. It never sleeps. It's constantly learning and shifting and compensating and changing. That part of the brain is wired to keep you safe, but it's also what dictates which emotional payoffs are our priorities. And what's interesting to me, okay, is we've talked about this one a lot. So I want to focus in on the emotional payoffs. And this whole conversation came from a question that a client asked me a week ago that I've been asked similar questions a lot. And that is, she said, Paul, why am I so much better at talking to people about improvement than actually doing it? And I'm sure many of us have heard the old phrase that those who can't do, teach. Well, that comes down to your brain's desire for an emotional payoff, okay? Remember, the prerequisite before this one to emotional payoff is life being predictable, okay? That your brain wants predictability, which is interesting because we want life to be better, okay? But all your brain hears is you want it to be different. We want our life to improve. All our brain hears and feels is that we want it to change. So we start creating these reactions. Then we get into the emotional game that's going on underneath this. We start wanting an emotional payoff. Now, the most basic level of this is doing things because we feel like it. That's the first challenge. At its most basic level, to keep yourself from ever being successful, ever reaching the peaks of your potential and getting them to cry for mercy, as Og Mandino talked about, is live a life of feel like it, okay? I feel like it, I don't feel like it. Whatever the challenge was, getting an opportunity to be able to dive into the feel like it, it's the most base level of your brain that is looking for an emotional payoff. Because obviously the easiest emotional payoff is to do something you feel like. And your brain that wants things to be predictable will take the upfront payoff every time. It's how it's naturally wired. It wants the upfront payoff, like the marshmallow experiment from the 70s, where they put a marshmallow in front of these young kids and said, we'll come back in 20 minutes, and if you don't eat the first one, we'll give you a second one. The majority of them ate the first marshmallow, and then what they tracked over the next 30, 40 years in this controlled study of their happiness, their fulfillment, the quality of their education, their income, everything across the board was way higher with those who didn't eat the first marshmallow. But the majority of the kids ate the first marshmallow because the brain will take the upfront payoff if it can, if we allow it to, okay? If we surrender to that, to this lower brain, it's going to take the upfront payoff every time. And the most base level of that is I don't feel like it, or I'm waiting till I feel like it. And we get so complex in how we rationalize this. Oh, I'm just not that kind of person. Oh, that's just not me. Oh, that's taking away my sense of individuality. And I mean, we can get really complex in our arguments that really just came down to we didn't feel like it. And the challenge with playing on a don't feel like it level is we are victims to our own random biology and chemicals of emotions and responses and all these different stimuli that we don't totally understand. Like Og Mandino talked about in Scroll 6 in The Greatest Salesman in the World, that the tides recede, the tides advance, you feel differently. You go to bed feeling like a rock star, you wake up in the morning feeling like a crap hole. Like it just, and you don't even understand why. So if we're going to live a life of feel like it, we're going to live a life that's just going to naturally be tossed around by the current of what's going on, chemically around in us and around us, hoping that eventually the stars will align and we'll feel like doing what it takes. Okay. Feeling like doing what it takes when our brain's seeking an upfront payoff, it just doesn't work. It doesn't, 1 + 1 = 5. It doesn't compute. Okay. It's a square peg in a round hole kind of thing. So first, let's identify the amount of time and energy we're spending surrendering to a feel like it life. How much energy are we spending building constructs of rationalization, justification around what we feel like and don't feel like? If we really strip back the cover, really unpacked it, okay, we'd find out that it really came down to, but would hate to admit, that it was just I didn't feel like it. We can, as human beings, especially as entrepreneurs and business leaders, we have really active minds. We can get some really complex, layered, deep conversations that really, when it came down to it, we just didn't feel like it. And we've gotten really good at hiding from that, because if it could be that simple, then we could deny the upfront payoff, not eat the first marshmallow, and exercise restraint because we want the back end payoff. And something that has been taught metaphysically, and for those who didn't eat the first marshmallow and the way they live the rest of their lives, that instinctive restraint is that the back end payoff 99.9% of the time is so much better than the upfront payoff, just the emotional high. And so we start diving into this realm, and some of us have created PhDs around our ability to hide the fact that it's just, I don't feel like it, or I do feel like it, rather than stripping that down and allowing it to be that simple. What's interesting is you might unpack this and strip this down and realize that you have been living a just feel like it life. And that's okay. That's okay. You don't strip it down so that you can scrutinize and put your inner self on trial. You go in there so that you can understand it. So you can start to understand it. If you can understand it, you can participate in conversations with the feelings. And then eventually you can build habits that allow you to dictate the feelings. Let me give you an example. Last Tuesday, I threw my back out. Okay. I've got 3 degenerative discs, tore all 3 of them and compressed them and herniated them about 1.5 years ago. I see Tiger Woods' neurosurgeon. I wanted to make sure I found someone who could get me back to doing what I wanted to do. And it finally just came back to the point where he said, I can't get you back to powerlifting. It's either you keep powerlifting and you get surgery at a really young age in replacing your discs, fusing your back, and, heaven forbid, all kinds of other things, or not even being able to walk, or you stop. And he prided himself on being the one that gets people back to what they want to do. So I knew I was done powerlifting. But even with that, I'm at risk of throwing my back out at different times. And I threw it out on Tuesday. And for those of you who know me really well, you know that when I throw my back out, because I'm a really physical person, and I'm a large person, okay, I'm a big guy, so I feel everything, especially when something like my core is out of alignment like that, and muscle spasms and all kinds of things are just creating havoc on me, that it's one of the most emotionally devastating things that I'll experience. And when that happens, my feel like it life kicks in overtime. And I start surrendering to I feel like it's and I don't feel like it's more than anything. So I know that's a major trigger of mine. Now fortunately I had a schedule just chock full. So I'm sitting here coaching with people on Zoom, trying to get up in between and loosen my back a little bit as it's progressively getting worse and worse and worse throughout the day. Just dreading how it's going to feel when I wake up the next morning, which is usually the worst. But I get through the day, I go home, I get on my inversion table and I lean back to relieve some of the pressure on my back. I pull out my phone and I text my wife, because she is incredible and will support me in everything. And will do the things for me that when she understands what kind of a space I'm in, sometimes to my detriment, because she's so good to me. And I text her and I said, will you go get me some food? And I've made some healthy decisions about the way I want to live my life. I've made some healthy decisions about how I want to feed my body. and how I want to feel and what weight I want to be at and what fitness capacity I want to have. I made those decisions, but I was surrendering to a feel like it life. Decisions don't have a chance. My conscious decisions were on attack, were being attacked. And I was surrendering to a feel like it life. And so I texted her, I said, will you get me some food? And she said, what do you want? I said, I want some Wendy's. And then she just responded kindly and lovingly, what would you like me to get? So I said, I'll get a Baconator, a double Baconator, and a spicy chicken sandwich and a large fry, which was like nothing for what I could put down at that place. Okay. I can eat. There's a reason I grew, got as big as I am. But with that said, I sent the text. And as soon as I sent it, I had just this brief glimpse, an emotional glimpse of the decision that I had made. And I became very, very aware of this feel like it experience I was having and felt totally justified. I just got through a 13-hour coaching day, showed up for all these people, made impacts on countless lives, really emotional payoff, was awesome. So now it's time to take care of me and do what I feel like. And I don't feel like having salad for dinner. I feel like feeding myself crap, because that, as I've taught myself that that's a nice upfront emotional payoff in the past. And then I sat there and I ended up asking myself a question out loud, just super important when we're in a state that it's not serving us and we're frustrated and we're feeling the guilt or the shame or we're feeling stuck or whatever the case is. We want to be able to get outside of our own mind, and the two best ways to do that are to write things down or to say them out loud. And I asked myself something out loud as I'm flipped upside down on my inversion table. I said, how do you want to feel tomorrow? Literally laying there in my basement. I said, how do you want to feel tomorrow? And I just thought about it and I said out loud, I said, I don't want to feel like Wendy's. I don't want to feel like that tomorrow. And immediately I grabbed my phone and I texted my wife and I said, don't worry about it. She was just about to pull out of the garage. And I said, don't worry about it. I'll deal. And immediately it just went, oh. And I felt so much better. The upfront emotional payoff could have been nice for a minute, as it usually is when we're addicted to and or surrendering to a feel like it mentality. But even have just a glimpse. And if I hadn't asked myself that question out loud, when that glimpse came, which is a habit I've created of being conscious of the conversation going on up here, and if I'm even a little worried about whether the conversation is going to serve me long term, to start asking myself questions out loud. And so I asked it. And some of us don't want to ask it out loud. Sure, we convince ourselves, oh, it's silly to do that. But really what we're doing is we're avoiding disrupting our old patterns because they feel comfortable, they feel predictable, they feel nice, and the brain appreciates that upfront payoff. But man, right afterwards, and then even better when I woke up the next day, and my back wasn't like healed and so much better, okay? I paid as much as you would normally pay for a car for my bed though, and spent a couple of months thinking about like, why did I pay so much for this bed? Now I know why, because I did feel better the next morning, which was the first time ever that I'd thrown my back out and actually felt way better after getting up from sleep than before. But just metaphysically though, I felt amazing. And then spent the day celebrating that decision. And then ended up talking to my wife about it just last night. And she was like, yeah, I was kind of floored. When you texted me that and said, never mind, I'll just deal. I was like, she thought someone had hijacked my phone and texted her that, because that was not my MO. Because one of the top triggers for me of going into a just feel like it mentality is a lower back injury. Okay. It used to be even easier to trigger myself. Just having the long day without throwing my back out was a really easy opportunity for me to start justifying, rationalizing because I feel like it or because I don't feel like it. And so let's start to become aware of this kind of mentality, because metaphysical addiction can come from getting this upfront payoff that your brain would really prefer to have rather than restraint. Okay. And it finds it in a lot of different ways. Now, the other one that came up for me or came up in this conversation with this client was there's feel like it and don't feel like it. Okay. So we've got this really simple thing of think about it. If we think about stuff, we can get an emotional payoff. In fact, let me reset this whole board because this is the last point I wanted to make. Okay. Again, we're talking about metaphysical addiction and the emotional payoffs that we are battling. So first of all, we want to become familiar with and unpack our feel like it, don't feel like it mentalities, because it's a really base level of how we operate as human beings. And we surrender to our emotions all the time because it's an upfront payoff. It may not be like a payoff we feel amazing, but at least we feel better than resisting it. And so we justify it in lots of different ways. And so understanding that feel like it, don't feel like it mentality is the first step. But then the second one, I want you to see this progression. The first emotional payoff, metaphysically, especially in your personal development, that your brain loves to get you addicted to is thinking. Loves to get you to think about it. Because if you can think about it, there's a nice emotional payoff to thinking about it, because your brain can go all sorts of places. It can create your best life and you being so much more disciplined and being able to resist those tacos on the weekend and being able to do this and get to the gym every day. And thinking about that's amazing. And many of you, if those of you who have taken the habit finder, that third measurement down, intentional, that thing moves over to the right, this is a really, really easy thing to get addicted to. Or if you go to the structure section of your habit finder, which is the last section, also the third measurement down, analytical. If that one moves over to the right, this is a really, really easy thing to get addicted to. We get addicted to thinking about thinking because your brain loves that. Because if you think about it, nothing changes. If you just think about how great that'll be when, and worrying about things really bad, so when they don't turn out as bad as they were, it just feels a little bit better, but nothing actually changed. None of the stuff we worried about, those worst case scenarios, happened more often than not, okay? And the things we were dreaming about, we didn't end up having to do anything differently. So our brain's gonna love this, gonna totally support this. Emotional payoffs. This is why events can be so dangerous. We go to events, we read a book and it gets our thinking going. And at the event or during the book, we just feel amazing. And this is on full charge. Emotional payoff, emotional payoff, emotional payoff. But then we get to Monday morning, most commonly, okay, or the next day, or something happens that doesn't align with our thinking, and boom, we crash just like an addict. We crash. We come face to face what we were hoping our addiction would help us avoid. But all it does is we go around it and then gain a whole bunch of momentum and get flung face first into it, and it hurts even more. That's what addiction does. And the first thing your brain loves to get you addicted to is thinking. Now, thinking's powerful. Thinking can be constructive. Thinking's important. The whole basis of the habit finder is being able to understand what you're thinking so you become aware of it and can start, so you can participate in that conversation and then start dictating that conversation. But it's a slippery slope. A lot of us are trying to think our way out of thinking problems. Now, here's the next one. If we start to overcome our addiction to thinking about thinking, well, our brain's going to throw another one at us that is just a little bit outside the scale that feels like we're being a little bit more productive. And that's talking about it. This one's fantastic. Because if you overcome your addiction to thinking, your brain knows next it's going to get you addicted to talking about it. Because if you can talk about it, oh, you're thinking about it, now you're putting it into action. Unfortunately, as far as the action usually gets is right here, out of your mouth, and not necessarily into actual activities and action. Talking provides a tremendous emotional payoff. It's why we love to teach people how to do things more than actually doing them. It's not that those who can't do teach, it's those who don't feel like doing will at least be able to find an emotional payoff teaching. Now, there's a lot of people who teach that do. I would like to consider myself one of those. Every night before I go to bed, I ask myself, did I live worthy to coach today? Meaning, did I do? Did I challenge? Did I unpack? Did I observe? Did I create? Okay? Was I intentional? All those different things, because that's what I'm asking my clients to do. That's what's going to give me the artillery to be able to show up and serve them and ask the questions that could unlock something for them and facilitate something for them. However, if all I'm doing is just talking, I'm going to get an emotional payoff, but I'm still at risk of not going anywhere different. And so our brain's like, oh yes, we've got them thinking about thinking. This is great. Our life doesn't have to change. It doesn't have to be different. And we're sitting here in our conscious minds going, yeah, I'm thinking about things different. I'm thinking about what I've been thinking about, and I'm thinking I'm not going to think that way anymore. So I'm going to think my way to amazingness. And it doesn't work. And your brain's just loving it, sitting back there going, this is great. He's spending all of his energy just thinking about what he's thinking, and we don't have to do anything different. We're still just as predictable as we ever were. And we're getting an emotional payoff. How great is that? Uh-oh. We're starting to figure out that thinking doesn't actually change where we're at, and it doesn't actually improve our lives. Okay, let's get them to start talking about it. Because if they talk about it, then they're going to be more accountable to it. And so then we start talking to other people about it. Then we start sharing all these incredible insights that we have. I'm not saying that's wrong. Please, any of you are going, oh, should I not be sharing my ahas? Should I not be sharing what I'm reading and what's helping me out? 100%. Share it. That's a great part of a community, great part of mentorship and friendship and relationships. This is a great thing. Just like thinking is important. I'm just pointing out some slippery slopes. That if this is what's creating your emotional payoff, good luck using what you're talking about. Good luck actually doing anything with it. Because your brain's going to go, check, emotional payoff, and we don't have to change. Life is still predictable. Awesome. This is great. Yeah, keep talking to all those people. In fact, go to that event where they'll bring you up on stage and you can talk to some other people, even more people about it. Even bigger emotional payoff and even more of a reason to not do anything with it. It is hard to think a lot, talk a lot, and still do when we're stuck in that base level, feel like it, don't feel like it. Because when we don't feel like it, we could at least think about it and get an emotional payoff. Then we didn't have to do anything. Okay, kind of starting to figure out that game. So now I'm going to talk about it, which is actually doing something, okay, but not doing anything that's actually going to create a different habit. It can assist. Our language is super important, but talking about it, teaching it, if you're doing that for an emotional payoff, upfront emotional payoff, then it's not going to lead you to where we want to go. And that's to actually do the things that you were thinking about, that you're starting to talk about, so that you can take action. That's what Mandino was teaching us as he took us through this beautiful progression in the 10 scrolls. The wisdom of the ages. Today I begin a new life. Love, persistence, miracles, living this day as if it's my last. All these different things, just beautiful stuff, multiplying my value. And then all of a sudden, whoa, just punches you in the face with, my dreams are worthless, my plans are dust. All are of no value. Only action determines my value in the marketplace. This is heavily influenced by this and this and this. This is a natural progression. What we think about, we talk about. What we talk about, we do. But there's too much leakage. Too much leakage when we leak into these emotional payoffs along the way. And the more that we get from those, the less we're going to get from the payoff of doing. And this is that back end payoff that is almost always exponentially more valuable and more powerful than any of this leakage that we get along the way. Now, I'm not saying you need to restrict yourself from enjoying thinking about productive things, thinking about what you want to create in your dreams, but you're going to want to learn the principles that are going to allow you to use that to drive it into talking about it and becoming more aware of your language around it and teaching other people about it, so that while you're going through this natural progression, and oftentimes simultaneously, you are doing the do. Not the Mountain Dew, okay? Speaking of addictions, okay, that used to be a major one of mine. But going through a natural progression of understanding our thoughts, understanding our language, and taking action. Boom, boom, boom. Then the next progression in our life, boom, boom, boom. And then they coexist. We continue to think productively, continue to support it with our language, and continue to take action. And as soon as we start getting too much of an emotional payoff from one or the other, we start losing some of these. Now, some of you even have the challenge where you do too much at the sacrifice of your language and your awareness and your thoughts. But the vast majority are getting emotional payoffs from thinking about what they want to create, then trying to get a payoff talking about it. And by the time they get to the doing, they have nothing left because they've spent it all on buying emotional payoffs. I mean, you're at the production store. You're producing what you want in life. That's what it means to be productive, is you want to produce the things you want to have in life. If you're not producing what you want in life, you're not being productive, period, end of story. And every day you're going to this store with a certain amount of currency. And you're like, ooh, I could get an emotional payoff from thinking about this. So you buy an emotional payoff. Ooh, that felt nice. Okay, but thinking about it didn't really get me there. So I'm going to talk about it. Ooh, and I could buy an emotional payoff from talking about it. And so we buy that. Ooh, I could get another one. Ooh, go back to thinking about this and get an emotional payoff, thinking more deeply and more intentionally about this, all with good intentions. But we keep buying this, and then it comes time to buy action. We have no currency left. Our brain isn't willing to support us because it spent its currency on emotional payoffs that it would prefer to have up front. It would always prefer to have it up front because this part of your brain isn't thinking about what the back end payoff could be. You can't think that far ahead. This is the lower brain. This is the part of the brain that connects us with the rest of the animal kingdom, where Og talked about when an eagle is thirsty, it drinks. When a lion is hungry, it eats. Think, do, okay? And this part of the brain is thinking about what the immediate emotional payoff could be, and that's what it continues, why it continues to surrender the back-end payoff. And that creates metaphysical addiction. We get addicted to thinking. We get addicted to talking and teaching. And we run out of momentum. Scratch that. I don't like that word. It's not that I don't like that word. I just don't like how it's been used recently. Scratch that. So we run out of currency. We run out of energy. We run out of intention for the action. Okay? The amount of time between this process could be 30 seconds, or it could be 24 hours, depending on how important it is to engage this constructively and not give in to an emotional payoff of fantasy, or even worse, lose our money gambling with catastrophe. Okay? Again, investing it in fantasy that never pays off, or gambling with catastrophe usually never turns out as bad as we thought it was going to be. And then we proceed into talking about it and becoming more aware of our language, okay? And using that more constructively to support the action that has got to be taken to create what we want. Okay? So, great question. Just saw at the bottom of the chat. Amanda asked, how do you stop that? Okay? Well, when you've got a bar bent this way, you can't just bend it straight again. You got to kind of bend it back and straighten it out. And so the first thing I would do is find out which one you're more addicted to. Are you more addicted to the thinking emotional payoffs or the talking emotional payoffs? You're going to want to become aware of that. Become aware of how much I feel like and I don't feel like is playing into your ideology, into your philosophy around action. And start unpacking the ones you've made more complex than that when it really comes down to it are just the feel like it's and don't feel like it's. And start creating isolated moments each day where you know you're going to run into a don't feel like it, okay? And you're going to choose otherwise. You're going to bypass the thinking and the talking and go right into doing. And then after you've done, you're going to talk about, okay, what you did and use language that supports what you accomplished. And you're going to think about how good it felt to take that action. We're going to go in reverse so that eventually we can create a clear runway for going the correct way. So for those of you who are stuck in this, you've got to reverse engineer. Okay, some of the greatest things in life have been created from reverse engineering something that someone created on accident or was designed for something else. And so reverse engineer it so they could use it more productively. Okay. So reverse engineer by getting addicted to starting, get addicted to getting into action so that you don't have any currency left to get addicted to talking and teaching and thinking. With the intention that as you as you do, you're going to use language that supports your do, and you're going to think about how awesome it is to be doing, which is eventually, you might even flip that scale without even consciously realizing that you've done it, as long as the action shows up consistently. That's why scroll 9, that's why that punch in the face from Og was so critical before he gave us scroll 10 in terms of asking for guidance from a power greater than us. It was the only thing more important than saying, hey, action is what determines your value in the marketplace. So that's how you start to do that. And if you continue to run into frustration with that, if you continue to see this leakage and these emotional payoffs in your addiction to metaphysical development, to personal development, and you haven't taken the habit finder, then take that and start there. Give us an opportunity for my team to dive into that with you for free. And then if we can paint a picture of what it would look like for you to recalibrate this, and doing so would create an ROI on the investment it would take for you to work with us, and you can work with us at a lot of different levels, then we'll invite you to do so. It's really that simple. But we're not going to be able to offer you a solution if we don't understand what's going on with your thinking first. That's why we always start with the habit finder. And some of you, that's all you need. Okay, we don't sign up every client that takes the habit finder. We don't try to, because it's an amazing payback to especially when we're talking to someone who just needed to know how they think, and bam, they were able to drop that emergency brake and they were able to take off in their life. And then others were able to help create supportive language with just a little bit more work. And then others who are having a hard time actually intentionally creating what they want in life, we can get into the depths and the weeds of where you're really living and what's really going on under the surface, and create some magnificent results at any level. Regardless of how successful you are, every one of us have that one piece of life that isn't quite where we want it to be, isn't as good as we want it to be. We're not as fulfilled as we'd like to feel, or whatever the case is in some area of our life. And some of us have it in many areas. We'd love to take you deeper, love to take you through that with these kinds of principles. But I hope that a lot of you on here today got value from this that you can apply now. And as always, grab just one or two things from this. Don't try and grab onto the whole thing. I go deep and wide really fast, and I get that. But I hope there's just one thing you could have grabbed onto today. And also, I appreciate your willingness to listen in the beginning as I shared something that was, really important to me. And this is our Power Session family. And as a family, I had some family business I wanted to share with you. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to take what I think about and what I do and talk to you about it. So appreciate you being here, and create a great day. We'll see you next week.